Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLNS Rugby podcast as we look back on an Irish win over Australia where Cian Healy broke the caps record and Andy Farrell signed off on part one of his reign with a victory. With me this morning to discuss and reflect on a narrow victory for Ireland, our podcast regulars and Irish fans in David Cordial and Jack Fogarty. Gentlemen, welcome back to the channel.
Hey, Kel. Hello, hello.
It's good to have you on, lads, firstly, but we will get stuck into it. For anyone who's new to these episodes, we start with a kind of summation of the action, what we might, for anyone who may have missed it. David, not a huge pile to go through for the first, 50 or so minutes, but in all, your thoughts on this one?
It was a very ropey game, certainly from Ireland's point of view. Ropey start. I think we had in the first half of the game. It was definitely a match, I think, to flip the narrative from the New Zealand game and the Argentina game. A match where Ireland were better in the second half than they were in the first, but that was more a reflection on how poor the first half was than how good the second was. Um, at the start, there was an initial indication that Ireland might get off to a strong opening. Managed to get the ball wide. Hugo Keenan, with his kind of trademark loping stride, managed to get within 5 meters of the try line and very nearly probably could have given the pass off to James Lowe, but decided to hold on to it. And I think it was Andrew Callaway managed to get a hand to it and rip the ball out of his grasp. And that kind of just set the tone from there that handling errors were going to be the name of the game. For the rest of that first 20 minutes, Ireland weren't able to get any purchase. Australia were the first on the score sheets through Noel Lolesio off the kicking tee. Then some poor Irish defence out wide allowed Australia to get over in the corner to make it 10-0. And Ireland didn't score until 22 minutes in, and a very strong effort from Josh van der Flier, who's probably one of the only players who came out of that looking, I wouldn't say better, but looking as good as he usually does, to his credit. The rest of the half kind of passed mostly with, it was quite stop-start. There were a number of tries, or sorry, a number of mauls or scrums, mostly because of the number of handling errors on Ireland's part. Australia managed to widen the gap to 13-5 with another Noel Lolesio penalty. And I think we were very happy when the halftime whistle went, just to give it a chance to get in and reset before the second half. First 10 minutes of the second half, to their credit, Ireland did come out firing a Sam Prendergast penalty to bring it back within 5 points, and then a nice line-out move off of one of the only line-outs of the night that did work for us, leading to Caelan Doris going underneath the posts to bring Ireland in front for the first time in the game. But it didn't last long. Noel Lolesio once again off the kicking tee, chipping away and keeping Australia first back into the lead and then stretching that lead. And it took until Jack Crowley, Craig Casey, and I think Gus McCarthy came off the bench, along with Peter O'Mahony and Ian Henderson, to make the kind of impact that Ireland needed, to finally to Gus McCarthy getting over for a maul try and just about dragging Ireland back into the lead, which gave us, I think, about 10 minutes at the end just to cling on to give Cian Healy the kind of the win he deserved on his big day and the RFU's big day, the 150th anniversary. But a ropey game overall. A win is a win, and it'll be chalked up as that. But I don't think it's a game a lot of players will want to look back on particularly favorably.
It's first, just the first couple of minutes. I wouldn't even go as far as say first 10, maybe first 5, 7 minutes. That okay, this is Ireland just growing into the autumn. Everything seems to be getting better as the minutes go on from New Zealand to Argentina to Fiji, then on to Australia. But it did kind of die down. And credit to Australia, I think they knew very early on how to shut down Ireland. It was very similar to New Zealand. This cut out a lot of inside passes. They didn't really respect Ireland going off 10-12. They very much shut down the 13-15 outside channel access, knowing that Sam Prendergast is very good at those longer passes, those skip passes. And I think they did a very good job on that. Jack, I'll bring you in here for your initial thoughts. Like, it is a win. It's not a great win, but it's a win. And it's probably important to separate the two, because autumn has just been, it has just been that. It has been, yeah, it's a win, but it's not hectic, but it's a win.
Yeah, it was strange watching it because I felt like the Fiji game almost give us a gave us a false sense of security that we could go back to playing the swashbuckling style of just going wide and making inroads. Felt like what Ireland needed to do was just be more direct and still have the same shape. Don't change too much, but we saw when, especially when Hendy and Gus and Pete came on, there was just a little bit more kind of aggression in the way that we went into contact, especially, Pete perhaps didn't make loads of meters, but he committed to maybe three fellas every time he went in because he was just flying into contact. And I just think that just gives you, the extra half a second maybe. We saw with like Van der Fleer's score, I think it might be Frost or might have been Williams, who they just slip just before they're about to get into the defensive line, and it's little sort of moments like that where you just need to have a little bit of luck go your way or something like that. So, you know, I thought Ireland just made some poor decisions really in terms of when to go wide. The Australian defense was quite passive, but not not just not they weren't just standing around. They were spaced really nicely, and they just managed to kind of do enough. But if we had hung on to the ball a little bit more, probably would have made a lot more meters than we did. They didn't even hit the 400 mark for sort of meters made, which is pretty low for an international game. And yeah, it was just strange, really, because it was there, in front of them, and you could see that there was just a little bit of a. I thought they looked almost disinterested sometimes with the way they were playing. So Gibson Park just sort of, just he was like, yep, yep, up, ball in, ball out, and but there just wasn't much of a variety in the attack, and it was just it's just a bit stagnant really to begin with. But it did pick up eventually, but certainly one that you would get the hairdryer treatment at halftime for, which uh, seemed to be a little bit, at least a little bit of the case. And it was good to see the young fellas go well, because I thought that Gus and Sam played really really well in pretty tough circumstances. But yeah, I mean we'll get onto the bench in a bit, but it was just a bit of a strange game, but at least it was close. So it was fairly exciting in that regard.
No, completely agree there. And I'll kind of stick with yourself, Jack, because as we mentioned Gus McCarthy, we mentioned the halfbacks maybe separately, but just starting with the forwards, because the bench impact was absolutely massive. McCarthy in the last 10 minutes, Henderson, O'Mahony got 25 minutes each, as did Tom O'Toole, who I felt did really well. Just starting with the forwards first, massive impact, and came in probably just at the right time for Ireland.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I jokingly sent out a bit of a tweet that when about 18 minutes in, when Finley was having a bit of a nightmare, and I thought, should Tom O'Toole come on now, guys? But that was a joke. Don't worry, Connacht fans. I do like Finley, but it was just one of those nights where the starters, some of the starters were grand, like Porter and Byrne and Doris and Van der Fleer. They're all kind of doing what you kind of expect from them, and they don't really dip below sort of 6, 7 out of 10. But yeah, especially when Gus came on, for a fella who's only 21, he shored up the line out through really well and just linked quite nicely. Got loads of pressure on I think it was Tom Wright? I mean Tom Wright knocked it on, so put loads of pressure, sort of missed tackle, but it's one of those sort of Gary Ringrose tackles where it's he misses the tackle, but he eventually causes the error. So that was really really pleasing. Obviously Keane comes on by himself, he's given the big introduction. Was class to see that. And again, like showing that there's just no one else who's close to him in terms of like quality, in terms of that, replacement for Porter, who's it going to be? And no one can really kind of put their finger on who that sort of obviously next person is, because when you look at tight head, it's very clearly Furlong, Baleam, Tom O'Toole, and then Clarkson at this point, really, isn't it? So yeah, they came on and they were all great. I thought the bench was actually very, very good. I was a bit apprehensive. I thought, Hendy's not playing great. Does he merit that selection? The same with Pete, just as a Chukwueze to come in, just have a bit of freshness, and he would certainly carry if as well, if not better, because that's ultimately why he's in the team. But no, a great impact, and I thought that a few of the elder statesmen were very good in the way they approach things. Happy for Hendy, obviously he gets quite a bit of stick, but again, with the introduction of Gus and him, I thought the line out just shored up a bit better. And the leadership with Pete is obviously going to be massive too. So just changes the dynamic. I thought our second row, with McCarthy and Joe McCarthy, I should say, and Ryan, just not at the level that we kind of expect from them. The line I didn't function as well, and it's always been Hendy's biggest strength is like his set piece is just absolutely solid. So no surprise that when he came on, that did improve significantly, I thought. Yeah, great, good to see Tom O'Toole get some more minutes as well. I thought he played well. Everyone sort of highlighted the penalty that he gave away, but that is like a split second away from being perfect sort of slow down ball, because what he's doing is what everyone does when they make a tackle. They roll over onto the right side of the ruck so that they can just sort of keep a hand on the ball just for that split second longer. But I thought PRD was very cute and knew exactly what he was doing, and quite rightly penalised him. I mean, it's so close to being perfect, but you just split second too long and you get penalised. So it was good. I think it ultimately vindicated Andy's selection, but I mean I do stand by it's a little bit of a risk just having those older guys in there, because they already know kind of how to do that. It would have been nice to have maybe had another couple of guys tested, but with injuries and things like that and the way the autumn went, it's no surprise that he went with the selection that ultimately got him the win, just about.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. And we will move on to kind of, the takeaways from the autumn, moving into Six Nations, the squad. I do think you've made a good point there, because I do like, I'm not going to dial back on it just because of the result and how, like, O'Mahony, Henderson, even Byrne at six, I thought he had his best game at six so far. But I do still feel like, well, if you had, say, Jacob Stockdale was fit and he was on the wing, or Cormac Izuchukwu was at six, or even Gus McCarthy starts at hooker, I don't think Ireland necessarily lose that game because those players being in there. And I do think that's still the team that's underlining, is that you can still make one or two changes and it will still work. And we can talk about that with 10 in a few minutes. And we will get on to 10. But David, the back three, or the three backs on the bench, Craig Casey, Jack Crowley, Gary Ringrose, you could have made a very, very, very strong case for all three of those to be starting. But off the bench, talk about instant impact from all three. They were all brilliant. And along with Gus McCarthy in particular, they're probably the lads who saved Ireland's bacon.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't think it's even a knock against the guys who were on the pitch to begin with. In the centres we had Bundy Aki and Robbie Henshaw. Those both Lions players. But I think just to have, it's kind of the situation that Ireland want to be in, where you can have a Ronan Kelleher starting and a Gus McCarthy to come off the bench. You can have Robbie Henshaw starting and Gary Ringrose to come off the bench. You could have Jack Crowley coming on for Sam Prendergast coming on for Jack Crowley, and to not see any dip, but also to have, have a player like Jack Crowley or Craig Casey coming on at 65 minutes, fit, and in Craig Casey's case, fired out of a cannon and with a point to prove, and that kind of impetus and that kind of energy at the end of the game. Particularly when you have younger tens, you could leave. Jack Crowley could play 80 minutes and Ireland wouldn't suffer for it, but to have multiple players in those positions who can, can bring the same level of talent, but have, a full tank of energy at 65 minutes, particularly at the end of a game like that, where it had been kind of stagnant for the whole game. Ireland kind of had struggled to get things firing. Just to have those guys come on at that point and inject a bit of pace, a bit of energy, but also a bit of, in Crowley's case, being on the bench rather than starting would have put a boot up his ass, and he definitely, stepped up, as I think anybody who's watched him would expect him to do. Craig Casey, wanting to justify the fact that he's now being routinely selected ahead of Conor Murray, and I think he did. Gary Ringrose kind of in and out of the squad with injuries and the rest, but he missed out on line selection last time because of injury. He'll want to take the opportunity to rectify that on the next tour. And then Gus McCarthy, his second ever cap and his second ever try for Ireland. I mean, he couldn't have wanted for a better autumn for a guy who's still in the Leinster Academy, who was at the start of this season fifth in Leinster, to be shown that kind of faith by the national coach. He went out there and justified that selection. But I think if there are obviously positions that we do not have that level of depth, and I'm sure we'll get around to those in particular, particularly with the man of the hour on this same in particular. But to have that in those backs and that kind of versatility, meaning you do have that energy to bring off the bench, and it's not going to be a dip. That's not going to be a step down from who you had starting. That's a huge arrow to have in your quiver in terms of particularly a game like this where it needed breaking up, it needed opening up, it needed a bit of extra energy, and you couldn't want for better bench impact than players you can trust because you have started them so many times before.
No, absolutely, and I do agree, and I think the point that I made a few minutes ago, like if one or two different players came in, like the same still counts for Craig Casey, for Jack Crowley, for Gary Ringrose in particular. Now throwing Gary Ringrose, that makes almost feels dishonest to his abilities. Like he's done it all for Ireland. But again, like you could make a few changes and Ireland still would have played well. I do think from a stylistic point of view, the game was probably crying out for Craig Casey about 10 months before he actually got in, just because of you knew he was going to bring something. And it was just as Australia were starting to tire, you felt like, right, if we hit them now obviously Ireland looked to the forwards pack first, and I do think that helped because Peter O'Mahony, Tom O'Toole, Ian Henderson all got in. I think it's if we're being pedantic, I think it's 11 minutes before Casey and Crowley came in, if we're being really pedantic. But you knew that was when they were kind of crying out for the subs to happen. And I will be honest here, as much as I think Casey should have probably came on there, I also don't agree with bringing on 4 or 5 subs at once because I don't think it has worked for Ireland yet. So I do understand that there's that kind of catch-22, which do you do first? But very much so, I thought the bench had a massive impact. And even, like I think Tom O'Toole was someone who we mentioned earlier. I think he was probably better than Bealham on the night. I thought he was really good. I thought just moving Tyburn back into the second row, it's just there's an air of comfort about it, to be honest, because I think the game passed him by at 6 at times and in that role. And he's pulled off a very good November attempt. I'll give him that, but probably his best attempt in the November, unfortunately. David, I'll stay with you because we can't come this far into the show without talking about Australia. Even bearing in mind we had a full show without talking about New Zealand a few weeks ago, but Australia were the team that everyone wrote off, and then they kind of beat England and Wales. It's like, okay, no, they're coming good. And then coming into this week, having lost to Scotland and Will Skelton was ruled out, it almost felt like, yeah, Ireland by 15, 20 points. That was the prevailing team. Like the bookies had it at 14. That seems fair. But from pretty early on, it did feel like, yeah, no, Australia are here. This is not going to be easy in any sense. And it really wasn't. They were excellent.
They were, and for a team that has come from quite low depths, they had a very ropey rugby championship. I think they only registered 1 win.
The low ebb literally just being Eddie Jones, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. But it was a pretty low dip. They had a disastrous World Cup. Bringing Schmidt in, I think, will in the fullness of time be proven to be the right call. But it was a pretty low depth that he had to pull them up from, and he put in the effort to start blooding new guys, and that's something you'd like to see. But it does always come with the consequence that it does take new coaches and new players a while to get settled in, and that was definitely the case, but they came into this automation series, and yeah, it seemed like things started to click. Still quite scrappy, they're not all singing all dancing just yet, but wins are wins, and they were racking up those wins, and I think they'll really rue that they couldn't get that win over Scotland because it came very close. I'd actually never heard it referred to this before, but the Grand Slam of Autumn, I didn't know that was a thing, but there you go.
I have heard that, to be fair. I don't know if I'm a big fan of it now, to be honest. I think we should have exclusive rights to the Grand Slam term.
Yeah, it's not quite 5K. Although to be fair, they would have racked up. Theoretically, I suppose if they'd beaten Scotland and beaten us, they would have racked up wins against all four home nations, which would have augured well for the Lions story. You'd have to think, but yeah, I think they'll particularly rue not getting that win over Scotland. Although we'll have sympathy for them there because Scotland gave us a headache too when the last time we faced them. The thing about Australia was they're not perfect. They're still a long way from perfect, but the improvement under Joe Schmidt, just tidying up the little things. And I thought the thing that exemplified in this game, like you have to say, Ireland's mistakes definitely let them in. Ireland, there was, I mentioned before the Hugo Keenan, but I wouldn't even characterize it as a mistake, but the knock on before his potential first try, that was excellent defense on Australia's part, and I'd give full credit to their defensive effort there. But there were so many Ireland mistakes that were just unforced errors, unforced knock-ons from players who know better, from players who you'd expect better of. Australia, to their credit, pounced on that, and they took advantage of it. They took their try well, but from there on out, Ireland's defense, not always perfect, but held them well. So they just took their points and chip. They took their points and took their points and took their points, and it kept them in the game. And even when Ireland finally managed to retake, or to take the lead, rather, we hadn't been in front at that point, take the lead from Caelan Doris. I think it lasted about 5 minutes, and then Noel Lolesio took another penalty and put them right back in front. So I think that's a testament to their game management was excellent. For me, I think one of the strongest positions they had in that team was the back row. Fraser McWright, Rob Valentini, and then the captain, whose name Wilson. They were menaces, absolute nightmares. McWright in particular, like I've watched a fair amount of him in Super Rugby. He's an absolute nightmare to play against. And I thought when you have I think the back row in particular can fire. It can be that kind of spine in the team to really cause headaches. Balance that. If Ireland had tidied their act up again, you'd like to imagine they probably could have done better. But credit has to go to Australia for the disruptions that they did play. Obviously, Ireland made a lot of mistakes, but I thought particularly around ruck time, Australia there was more than once where Ireland got within 5 meters and Australia managed to either disrupt it and cause a knock on or just pull off a completely clean turnover. And I think that's probably where, particularly if we remember back to when he was coaching us, that's where you can see Joe Schmidt's influence. It's those little parts of the game, the basic stuff, but the stuff that if you get it right really cripples your opposition's ability to get any kind of foothold into the game. So I think obviously very happy to get the win, but if I was Australia, I'd be much happier with that loss than with the Scotland loss. That one I think that will kind of annoy them, but to put this Irish team who would have had ideas and going into the Autumn Nation series, I think I fully hope, I thought we were going for a sweep, and it came very close to being, we ended up with 3 from 4 wins. There's a reality that's not too far away where it could have been 1 from 4. So I think Australia can be relatively happy coming out of this with having caused Ireland the number of headaches they have, and I think they've built enough on the new kind of foundations that Smith has laid that I would not be concerned at all about the Lions Test series. I would still back the Lions to win it, but it's not going to be the sweep that I think people were fearing it was going to be at the peak of Eddie Jones' reign.
No, I would agree there, and like the credit has to go to Fraser McWright because I said it during the game, and like the battle between him and Josh van der Fleer was just brilliant. Like, and I've made this comp a couple of times on this pod, so if anyone's new to the channel, they might think I just pick out 1v1s and just watch them, but sometimes your eyes just get drawn to them. Red scrum caps help, I will say that, but for McWright and van der Fleer, I felt like every time their teams had something positive, they were involved. And like with van der Fleer in particular, because we will talk about this in just a second with players who stood out in the Green of Ireland, it felt like he's just been everywhere. It feels like he's run about 2 marathons per game for each of the last 4 games. Like there is an element that when Ireland don't play as well, it can look a bit stilted and a little bit stop-start. So a player who is literally all energy is going to just pop up a bit more. That's kind of, it's the nature of it. You'll see that in teams. It's like when a football team gets busted, but you got a box-to-box midfielder, he's just going to be seen more. I thought Van der Fleer was excellent, but McWright, if they go on and win that, he's man of the match. Like it's plain and simple, he's man of the match. I thought Tupou did well. That break was so unbelievably funny, and it's not like big man making a break makes it funny. It's the fact that he just goes, fuck it, and just throws the ball over his head, thinking that I think it was Nick Frost who was behind him, thinking, he'll be there, it's fine. And then Sam Prendergast makes the intervention. But again, that goes back to kind of, and I think we said in the preview, Australia had an ability to hit Ireland from anywhere, especially off of scraps, because they've got these wonderful athletes, not just in the pack, but out wide, like Swali and Akitau. Thought Akitau had a really good game as well. To his credit, I thought he defensively, both sides of the ball, actually, he was really sharp. But this is kind of going to, I know we haven't talked a huge amount about the game itself, but we're just going to kind of steer into players who stood out now and kind of move on to recapping the entire autumn. Let's start with yourself, Jack. Caelan Dorsey's man of the match. We've mentioned Van der Fleer, we've mentioned Bundy. In terms of the standout players, who's top of your list to get a mention?
Who's top of the list? I mean, without kind of going for all the obvious ones, it's great to see Robbie Henshaw getting game time at 13. I think it's his best position. He's been used a little bit too much in terms of just being direct, which I know you have to be sometimes, but I just think with his skill set and his ability to do all three, kick, pass, run, I just think that 13 gives him a little bit more freedom, and I'd like to see him play at 13 more than 12. But when you got the versatility, you're kind of pigeonholed into that. Byrne again continues to just be like a level above any other 4-5-6, if you want to sort of 4-5/6 in terms of that position. No one else is really close to him. McCarthy has a bit of the brawn and a bit of he can carry quite well, but he's still missing other aspects of his game. James Ryan does his thing and he's very busy, but it's just not quite kind of a standout performance or consistently. Hendy's the same, a little bit inconsistent. But yeah, Byrne just continues to be superb. I thought for an Ireland side that didn't play hugely brilliantly well, that Porter actually had a very sort of understated but good autumn, because everyone just thinks, oh well, the scrum's going to be a mess. He's going to give away tons of penalties. I don't recall seeing really any of that to massive extent. So in terms of hopefully seeing improvements on an already excellent player, it's good to see that Porter can kind of just stick to his remit, stick to the carrying, stick to that being a link player and being the player that we really want to sort of see from him, because he is just an exceptional kind of rugby player. But if he can, get rid of all the penalties and the silly mistakes and sort of lock down the scrum a bit more, he's very close to being that Lions starter come next year. And like Crowley, I think he gets a bit of a I think he gets a bit of a bum deal, because everyone just sort of puts the provincial hats on and thinks just like, oh well, Prendergast will be better, or Frawley will be better, or I think we should get someone else in. He's not as good. But when it comes down to it, like you see what happens when he comes onto the field or when he leaves the field. So, was it both New Zealand and Argentina games when he came off, we didn't score a point after that. So, ten is the most pivotal position on the pitch. I'm delighted for Prendergast. Don't get me wrong, this isn't me having a go at him or having a go at Frawley. I think they're all really excellent players. But like David said earlier, sometimes you just need a wee kick up the arse, and putting people on the bench is not being dropped. It's the the manager or the coach trying to basically figure out why the last 20 is a bit crap and go, right, let's put Crowley in there, put Casey on there, who I thought sort of kind of drifted in and out of a few games, but when he came on against the Aussies, I thought Casey was really excellent. And it was just a great kind of, you could tell that, the two Munster boys on the bench sitting there thinking, I bet they were chatting to each other like, lad, we need to absolutely go hell for leather here and give it a right good crack. And that's what they did. I mean, Crowley's first touch, he just flies on the outside arc and makes a good 5-6 meters on his first carry. And just fantastic. So, yeah, a couple of standouts, and then just special mentions, I guess, to Healy, Gus McCarthy, and Cormac Achukwu, for getting their first starts, but also Healy's broken record is just he's an exceptional player, exceptional longevity, and yeah, probably gone through like half the squad there, but no, those would be the ones.
The old reliable there, Jack, just naming everyone and saying they all played well. And that's
They're all
why we have positive people on together, so that one doesn't tear down the other. And I know David will be very positive in a minute. Before we move on, because I do want to ask David about players who stood out, I do want to mention Keane Healy, because it's one thing to break a caps record because some players will. It's another thing to do it in the front row because it's an incredibly attritional position, incredibly difficult. But to do it after it looked like you were on the brink of retirement, to the point that even Leinster were kind of looking past Keane Healy, thinking he is probably going to retire with this injury around 2016, 17. I can't remember the exact year. And then to go on, and basically you can now cut Keane Healy's career in two, before that big injury to after, and he still had two unbelievable careers, like, which is remarkable for anyone. Ireland will have to look on from him. It's likely to be his last season, but that's for a different day's conversation, and maybe the same day, maybe a little bit later on, but still have to give him his like unbelievable achievement for him, and no better man. I think the purest in me is delighted that there's a prop number one, just because it's a prop as number one most cap player for Ireland. David, I'll bring you in on players who stood out yesterday. I know we have basically name checked about 18 at least players of the 23, but for you, who stood out, or even was there anyone who kind of surprised you in how well they played?
Oh, surprising how well they played on the Ireland side. Not really.
Well, you can say Australia. Like, it's literally listed here in the notes, stars and green, but like Australia have a bit of green, so
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, Australia's back row were excellent. I thought Lolosio managed the game pretty well. I was trying to remember the name of the other Australian 10, and the only way I could remember it was when Lolosio said it mockingly after he was selected ahead of him. It was Carter Gordon. But yeah, no, I thought they were pretty good on the Ireland side. It's not a surprise, but Josh van der Fleer and Kenan Doris definitely were the two standouts. I was a little bit surprised that Doris got man of the match, not dissimilar to when Bundy got it last week. They were both excellent. I suppose they both are, so we expect a lot more from them. For me, it would have been van der Fleer. I thought he was brilliant.
I think he could have given Van der Fleer man of the match each of the last 3 weeks and have no
Yeah,
complaints.
that's
And
true.
he's ended up with zero. And it doesn't matter to players, but it's like, are these guys watching the same game to what we are? Because surely if we're having this conversation, there must be something to it.
Yeah, I mean, it should have been Casey last week. That's all I think. It's yeah, it's yeah, and Josh van der Fleer of all people definitely wouldn't mind at all. But no, I thought they were excellent. I thought Casey off the bench was, I mean, he had that really good patch in the South African tour before he got injured. And then to see him come forward, the Fiji game, he was fantastic. He got the full 80 minutes because we had the injuries out wide. And then to be on the bench for this match and to come off it and really just inject a bit of oomph, a bit of kick without overdoing it. He had the chip through that Mac Hansen managed to regather, or the chip over the top that Hansen managed to regather on the right wing. He just brought a bit of zip to it, which is amazing considering he was replacing Jameson Gibson Park, who's usually really good at that. But you could notice it as soon as he came on the pitch, just that extra bit of oomph he added. I thought Prendergast was very good. His I actually thought some of his, it's not something he's really well known for, but I thought some of his defensive efforts were actually quite good. There was a tackle over on the right wing. Now Australia ended up scoring on the left wing in the end, but like he was the last man. He managed to take the legs out from under the Aussie player to prevent a certain try there to get back
Very, very fitting use of take the legs from under him, like quite literally.
He did, yeah. Probably went a bit too low, if anything. But yeah, to getting back to intercepting when Tupou made that break up the front, it was Prendergast who grabbed the ball when Tupou tried to offload it backwards. Little stuff like that he'll want to add to his game because it definitely wasn't a strength for his before. And look, he's 21, he's tackling guys who could be 5, 10 years older than him. But that's definitely something he's going to want to build on again. And Gus McCarthy obviously off the bench was fantastic. Hugo Keenan, I think. I mean, he's. I don't know if he's quite up to the levels he had been before, but his work in the air, I think the new changes to the escorting rules will definitely favor him because he is very strong in the air. You know, Prendergast put that kick up the middle. Keenan wasn't able to gather it cleanly, but he was able to make sure he did knock it on and get it back to allow Ireland to continue to attack. So I think particularly with Jamie Osborne having been picked last week, Heel-Rue not having, or the injury he picked up, much the same as Stockdale will. But I thought Keenan definitely and including that first effort where he so very nearly got over in the corner in the first 5 or 10 minutes. I thought he represented well. So there weren't really in this game anyway, I think, any surprises. The players you would hope stood up when it was needed. But it's I don't know if this will be the game that they look back on as the one that really nailed on anyone or ruled anyone out.
Well, I'm not usually a fan of one particular game ruling anyone out of contention, so glad to see that's not the case. I do want to give a mention to Gus McCarthy before I move off because I think like he wouldn't have been in there if it wasn't for injury to Dan Sheehan, and probably the fact that Rob Herring and Ronan Kelleher had very niggly injuries coming in means he probably stayed around that little bit longer. Like they had long-term injuries. Kelleher had only played a half an hour all season. Herring hadn't played before the New Zealand game, and he took his chance. And that's exactly what you want to see. I think likewise, I think Uzuchuku did well last week, and Keane Prendergast did well last week, for instance. Obviously, halfback is where a lot of the conversation will be. I think my own 2 cents on it. I think Sam Prendergast had the performance that I probably expected him to have. Some good, some not so good. Defensively, some good moments. Sometimes he was ran over. That's normal. He is 21-year-old. He is quite slight. It is going to happen. I think like Sam Prendergast isn't running his own PR machine here. People saying that he's big and strong. He's tall, but it'll take time. He'll grow into his body. He'll grow into his physique, and he will get there. And he clearly has the skills. He has got the passing game, the kicking game, which are very, very strong right now. He's a very polished player. Like a lot of players who come out of the Leinster system are very polished from a young age. And it's good to see he's capable. Going forward, I still think it's Crowley's jersey. I don't think we've seen anything to say that anyone has done enough to take it off him as of yet. But it's going to be interesting now, even with Leinster. Like they've got European Cup next week. Kieran Frawley hasn't started a game since round 5 of the URC, potentially. I'm not 100% sure there. Does he come straight back in and start against Bristol? Is there a kind of fuck it, it's only Bristol kind of thing? I know they're going well in the Premiership, but like Leinster have annihilated Premiership teams not named Saracens for the best part of a decade now. So that'll be really interesting. But we'll talk about that at a later date because I do want to wrap things up and kind of look back on the autumn as a whole and looking forward as well. David, I'm actually writing a piece currently for Balls about players who stood out. Josh van der Fleer is there, Gus McCarthy, and all the young lads are there, as is Craig and Jamie Osborne in particular. But for you, what's your kind of big takeaways from the autumn?
It was a very, very mixed bag. Like I said earlier, we come away from this autumn with three wins from four. Off the back of that Australia game, off the back of the Argentina game, it could have, had Ireland not rallied, it could have been less. It could have been one. It could have been two from four. It could have been one from four. So I think, excuse me, they'll be happy. Happy is probably not the right word, but grateful enough to be coming out of it with three from four. I wonder if we're about midway through the World Cup cycle. I know not everything comes down to that, but you'd wonder if there's a bit of changeover. There are some older players in the squad who probably won't make the next World Cup. There might be a bit of a sense of a shift there, and I would wonder. I don't know how much it'll actually play in, but the fact that that was Andy Farrell's last game before he goes off to coach the Lions. There's a Six Nations starting next January. Where Simon Easter will be heading up the team, and then there'll be a tour to some kind of tier two is another. I don't want to use tier two, but there'll be a tour alongside the Lions tour for the Ireland players who aren't on that. So I don't even know if there's possibly an element of Some players are playing to get on a Lion squad. Some players are aware that they're going to be having to impress a different head coach for the next 12 months, and how much that might have even played into it. Or it could have just been garden variety fatigue. But it's I think it's overall it's a series where, you know, Andy Farrell capped 4 new players. I think we should be happy enough with that, as a little bit of a betting in. I thought the winners coming out of it were definitely Sam Prendergast, obviously, to now be, you'd imagine, probably second choice with Ireland, or if not, Kieran Foley's definitely under a massive amount of pressure there. Gus McCarthy obviously stepping into the hooker role. I thought Craig Casey, particularly given that the player in front of him is Jameson Gibson Park, who I still think has the edge, but is also no spring chicken, and you also would not be surprised if didn't make the next World Cup. So,
Probably didn't like it. I always find when I do ratings or talk about players, you have to hold them to their standard. Like you can't hold every player to the same standard. It's kind of natural. By Gibson Park standards of the last 2 years, he hasn't hit that this November. But at the same time, he was coming in off the back of great form with Leinster. This month could be an anomaly, or it could be just a case of maybe they get more out of him at Leinster,
yeah,
where he's got that half a second more on every single phase.
it's possible too. And, like, you know, going right back into Europe, it'll be an opportunity for a lot of those players to make up for lost time if that's what they want to do. I think you know, don't always want to leave in negatives, but if there were any losers or people who would regret this autumn, you have to think that Kieran Frawley is one of them. You know, that New Zealand game, you know, Jack Hurley started, wasn't fantastic, wasn't terrible. Frawley had the opportunity to come off the bench and do what he did in South Africa and get the win, and he didn't, and he played quite poorly. Now there was a lot of pressure, and a lot of players didn't play well that game, but that was his opportunity, and unfortunately, particularly for a guy like him who does not get that many chances at 10, it's gonna be chalked up as a missed one. Misses out on selection for the Argentina game, gets back on the bench for the Fiji game, but then because of back row injuries, or backline injuries rather, he ends up playing fullback. Now, I thought he played quite well, but in a way that might not even help him either, because then that just demonstrates his use as a utility player, rather than second choice 10. And I think if there's one other loser in that Ireland Test series, it's our loosehead depth. You know, it was very happy for Cian Healy to get the caps record for Ireland. No better man, no more deserving man. But the fact that a 37-year-old is now our backup loosehead. Tom O'Toole was tried in the Fiji game, and it didn't go particularly well for him. He was switched right back over to tight head for this one. So that's definitely something that we're going to have to look into. And then you think players who kind of had, I'm going to call them the middle players, who they didn't have a bad series, but we're going to have some regrets. The two that popped out in my mind were Jamie Osborne and Jacob Stockdale, because they had the opportunity in the Fiji game. I thought they both played fairly well in that game, and they just picked up really, really annoying injuries. And I think they're gonna rue that. Hopefully it's not a missed opportunity. It does show that Andy Farrell, particularly in Stockdale's case where he'd been out of the team for a while, does still have faith in him, does still think he can to step up to that level. And I thought he did in the minutes he had on the pitch, but he's definitely going to rue that injury. So as an overall Autumn Nations series, you know, the only word that really pops into mind is meh. There wasn't really a whole lot up, there wasn't really a whole lot down. It was just a kind of a mess series, and
it was grand.
It was grand.
Yeah, that's just to put an Irish bow on things. It was like, that's what it was. Like I did say, and I was on with yourself, Jack, when we did the Harpen show before this series, and I did say, look, if it's not 4 wins, it can't be really a success, because Ireland don't lose home games, and you have to, you know, to go back to that point, you have to hold standards to a relative degree, and like Ireland have to be beating New Zealand for it to be a success, because you're supposed to beat the other three anyways. But now we're at a stage where, right, there's so many different debates. I did say it 2 weeks ago, Ireland are finally interesting again, because they're not steamrolling everyone and just with the same team and just, you know, everything looks fine. There's selection debates, which will be had. There is the kind of evolution of the squad. Tactically, a lot of work on, a lot more than, you know, this time last year, for instance, when you look at the line out, again, 5 lineouts missed, 28 handing errors yesterday. I know it was greasy, but 28 handing errors is a lot in 80 minutes of rugby. You have, you know, a new coach coming, well, not a new coach coming in, you have a different head coach for the Six Nations, and you're trying to retain it. With all that in mind, Jack, I'm going to give you the very loaded question of what you would like to see in this upcoming Six Nations. And you can't say a title, because we all want to win the thing. That's taken for granted, I think. But what would you like to see in the upcoming Guinness Men's Six Nations?
A better logo.
That yes.
Logo is pretty terrible.
It's giving chocolate a caramel chocolate bar kind of vibe.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, whenever the Aussies are sponsored by Cadbury, you get a little peckish during these games. I'm thinking to myself, oh, a bit of dairy milk would be lovely right now. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, going back to your point, it's actually really interesting about when you were talking about holding everyone to the standards that we expect from them. If you apply that to the autumn, you'd have to give Ireland a pretty poor, rating out of 10. It's probably like a 5, right? Because it's so, like David said, so close to being 1 from 4. It was 3 from 4 in the end. But when you expect, what you expect from Ireland is pretty slick play, few errors, pretty efficient, and there was kind of none of that, wasn't there? So it's a pretty poor autumn in terms of level of performance. Results are, like you say, grand. But yeah, going into Six Nations, obviously, in order to win it, I think that they need to be able to pivot and change and sort of, do something different, try something that is when things are not going well, when it's a slippery ball, when teams have a good defensive set, if it's a rush or if it's a drift, they're gonna find they're gonna find gaps in our attack that they can then sort of get in and shut down because they're either resourcing the ruck very very well and don't have to put many people in the ruck. If they're being passive at ruck time, then we need to get more aggressive around the ruck and start trying to attack those edges of the ruck so that you can create more space out wide. So I think my issue with the autumn was it was a little bit of a dry run in terms of can we, have our pod system and people out the boot and, play the shape rather than actually changing the way we attack teams. So I just felt like there needed to be more kicking. There needed to be more of a direct, threat in terms of, going through the guts of a team. So I want to see, Gibson Park be able to play the way he plays for Leinster, but that means that other guys need to be able to clear the ruck cleaner, so he can get the ball out, he can attack the fringes and suck in a few players and things like that. Because it just, to me, felt a little bit like Ireland just sort of expected themselves to just sort of run around teams, which is just not going to happen. So, yeah, Ireland need to come up with a few new ways to beat teams and beat them well, because there's no point in trying to win games by one score, and that's never gonna end well unless you're South Africa, when they just know how to do it. So it's really quite tough, and I also would just like a little bit more rotation because, like we've mentioned, the age profile is pretty poor. So like Stockdale, Osborne, Izuchuku, Gus. If those guys, if those guys are being trusted more, then they should be trusted a lot more with some starts in some pretty big games. And it doesn't mean that people are being dropped. It means that we're getting guys time in the international saddle. And obviously, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of players had pretty poor campaigns these 4 games. So I think you have to at times freshen things up, give people a kick up the arse, and say you're not playing well enough. I am dropping you from this game. I'm putting a young fella in there because, be it Ryan Baird, be it Tom Clarkson, through availability, through injury, or through poor form, they should be playing. If they are, as we say, at their standard, they're outperforming their own sort of set standards. If they're performing above what they're expected, then they should probably be rewarded. If the incumbents are not performing to the standards that we expect from them, and that's just the nature of competition. And I think that's something that we should see a little bit more of in the Six Nations. But yeah, I'm just a bit worried that we're not going to see that, and we're going to see more of the same. And people who want to get on the Lions will demand to be playing every week. So, yeah, I'm not too hopeful. Basically, I think it's going to be pretty boring. They're going to go for the win. They're going to go for the title, and hopefully, I'd hope that we just see a few more guys play, who are not set, starters in that Ireland team.
And just kind of her final word on it, I do think that's where the catch-22 of going to Romania, Romania, Portugal, and Georgia, I believe, is who Ireland play in the summer. It's not confirmed yet, but that's the rumor. That's where the catch-22 arises, because if you're given caps to say, let's just say it's Gus McCarthy, Tom Clarkson, Cormac Uzuchukwu, Tom Ahern, Alex Candela, James Culhan, and so on. That's just your pack, for instance. And they play really well. There's it's only Georgia and Romania, and it's like, well, if we got them in during Six Nations time, it's kind of it's not a lose-lose, because you want to see guys get capped and to get that honor, because a lot of them deserve it. But that's just where that could trickle in. Whereas that Ireland A game against England, I would love to see a really strong Ireland A team there, and properly give them like a 2-week run in if you need to, in camp, give them a proper go at it and see, what's there. Because, like, I think one of the biggest headlines of the last couple of weeks was Andy Farrell saying we don't have the depth. It's like, we do. Like, do you know what I mean? We're outperforming South African teams in the URC, pretty much. And they're supposed to be the deepest nation in the world. Granted, not everyone is in South Africa. We're performing the Italians, the Scottish, and the Welsh. Like, we consistently beat the English teams in Europe, or at least we had been up until recently. So personally, I don't buy it, but they're all for a conversation for another day. We'll have Six Nations coverage coming in February. We will have European coverage in between then. But for now, I'm going to take a short break because I really, really need it. It's been a lot of rugby for the last 15 months at this stage. But we will leave it at that. My thanks to David and to Jack for joining me today, but also for everyone for coming on, including Brett, Jamie, and Hugh on the Opposition View podcast as well, for a different angle. Thanks home to everyone for listening. As I said, we'll be back with a little bit of European coverage over the next 2 months. But you can catch me on the United Rugby Rewind and the Red Army podcast as well. And the two lads will be on Harpin and on the Red Hand as well. But for now, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed the Autumn Nation series. But till then, take it easy.